So trigger stacking is the accumulation of multiple stressors and triggers over a short period of time. These multiple stressors and triggers normally would be fine on their own, but when together and stacked on top of each other, it causes an over-threshold reaction. So what is an over-threshold reaction? And some of you may know and some of you may not. So I like to break thresholds down into 3 zones. So our first zone is our green zone. This is where your horse is feeling safe and relaxed. They're showing no signs of fear and anxiety. They are just calm. This zone is the best zone to work with your horse. They are more receptive to listening, learning, and are more retentive. Our next zone is our yellow zone, and this is where you're starting to show signs of fear and anxiety. With this zone, we have to remain vigilant and cautious because it's rather easy for your horse to go from the yellow zone into the red zone. With ethical horse training and ethical horse care, if our horses do enter this yellow zone, it should be a priority for us to be working on getting our horses back down to that green zone where they're listening best and they are feeling safe. Our final zone is our red zone, and this is where the sympathetic nervous system gets activated automatically and our horses enter flight, fight, and freeze mode. So with flight mode, most of us have seen this with horses. This is when a horse goes and runs completely blind with no regard for their safety. This mode is kind of their primary defense mechanism. Then we have fight mode. This is a secondary defense mechanism. We won't see this one as much. This looks like animated feet, rearing, and sometimes turning their hind end towards the stressful stimulus that would have caused them to go over threshold. And then finally, we have freeze mode. This mode is when the parasympathetic nervous system, I hope I said that right, dominates over the sympathetic nervous system. Besides immobility, we'll see bradycardia, which is a lower than normal heart rate. Our horse's face and neck will become rigid, typically with their eyes fixated on a stimulus. Sometimes horses come out of this mode with violent reactions. When your horse is in flight, fight, and freeze mode, their stress systems are activated and several different stress chemicals begin circulating through their body. It's not good for horses to go over threshold. It's not good for any animals to go over threshold. With good training, we should be avoiding even getting anywhere near this red zone. But now we're going to talk about trigger stacking, and trigger stacking is kind of a quick way for us to reach that red zone easily. We're going to start with an example, and with this example, we're going to be starting with our horse training in a new arena, in a new area. With this, that's our trigger number 1, and unfortunately, that trigger is not going to go away. But then our horse begins to see a new or novel object at the end of the arena. And with good horsemanship and as a good trainer, you should be taking the time to introduce your horse to this object, to desensitize them to it. But for this example, we're going to assume that the trainer does not do that. So that actually becomes our second trigger. Finally, when our horse is now getting into that yellow zone, they start to get anxious, they start to be inconsistent, and inconsistency is a trigger for us humans and us trainers. Inconsistency can sometimes be annoying, and it's hard for us to stay in control of our reactions. So our third trigger is actually going to be the trainer's emotional reaction to the horse being inconsistent and showing signs of stress. Finally, we're rather close to that threshold. We're very dangerously close, and the tractor goes by, and that tractor is going to cause an over threshold reaction, and that horse is going to enter in that survival mode. All these triggers on their own, as you can see from the diagrams, are not big enough to cause a threshold reaction on their own. But because they were stacked on top of each other and not addressed individually, they cause an over threshold reaction. So we're going to restart this example, but think about it using our knowledge on trigger stacking and being ethical and thinking about how these triggers affect the horses and how we can kind of remove them if we can. So at the very start of our training session, we're in a new location, and as I said in the last example, this one's not going away. But from here, our horse is seeing that new and novel object, and instead of ignoring it and instead of not desensitizing our horse to it, we're actually going to take the time to introduce our horse to this object and desensitize them. At this point, this actually stops this object from becoming a trigger, and our horse no longer enters that yellow zone. Well, because that horse is not in that yellow zone, it doesn't get inconsistent, it doesn't get annoying, and the trainer is actually in a good headspace as well as the horse. So we get to remove that third trigger. Finally, our fourth and final thing, the tractor goes by and we're nowhere near threshold. So as you can see, compared to the two examples, with trigger stacking, it was very easy for the horse to reach that threshold. It can be in a matter of minutes. But if we take the time to address common triggers or something that's upsetting our horse in the environment, we can avoid trigger stacking. So hopefully this was educational. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks for listening if you stayed through the whole time. Bye.